It's nice to be invited to give a talk here, and my plan is to discuss today with you how to sell, in the end, a research idea to the reviewers. And what I will do is I will share my screen, and then I will show the slides that I have, and I will, based on the slides, tell you what I have to tell you. But in the meantime, what you can do is you can put your questions in the chat so that they are being answered when we're talking, but also to give me the opportunity to answer the questions after I've been giving my presentation. What you will notice is that I will build up the storyline and I will tell you how I will build it up. And some of the questions might be answered at the end, but I think it is wise to put the questions already in the chat when they're popping up in your brain, because you might forget them. And otherwise, you have to write them down on the paper. By the way, my name is Mette Skraastad. I am a consultant and trainer within Yellow Research. And what we do is we are helping researchers to apply for funding. And our specialty is mainly European Research Council, but also Marie Sklodowska-Curie. And what is also our specialty is some of the national research councils. So that's where I have mainly the information from, but I have also experience with EU funding and also collaborative funding. So I start with sharing my screen, and you can of course also use the hand to raise your hand if in case there is something where you say, well, hold on, I just would like to ask some questions. What is important is when you are thinking through to apply for funding is to think through who is your audience. And the problem with your audience is that they are not the regular people reading your articles. They are reviewing and they have an academic duty to do, an academic duty. And they know they have to read your proposal, but yeah, they might not be so interested in your topic. And that is slightly your problem. Somehow you need to convey to these people that you are enthusiastic about your research project and that they should select your project proposal. And the reviews have the task to assess your project proposal based on evaluation criteria and also some writing instructions. And the evaluation criteria are different from funding agency to funding agency, and sometimes even from funding scheme to funding scheme. And when it comes to instructions, I wrote here strong and weak points. And what you need to realize is that they have to give arguments why your project should be funded, but also arguments why your project should not be selected for funding. And what is very, very important, certainly in your field, is that it is easy, readable, and understandable. Even if they are not working exactly on the same topic as you're working, they should be able to read it and understand it. And the reason why they need to understand it is because that's the only way of remembering it. And if they remember the content, then they can write a proper report on the review, and they can also tell the rest of the panel why they should select your project proposal for funding by giving the arguments that are positive, but also knowing the answers if somebody is raising an issue during the panel discussion. And this is very, very important that you realize. Easy, readable, and understandable, because then you can remember. And this is related to the human brain. The human brain can only understand something if you put it in the context that this person knows, or to some extent knows. And that's what you need to realize. You need to think through who is your audience, what do they know, and where can I start? And most likely, that's not exactly at the point where you are, because you are an expert. And these people might not be up to full speed when it comes to knowing what's ongoing in your research field. And that's why I put a brain here, because you need to remember you're dealing with a human brain. You're not dealing with computers. And what you also need to realize is that when it comes to this kind of funding, is that there are different funding schemes. And on some funding schemes, they just read through a half an hour and it's done. And other funding schemes, they have to spend a lot of hours, and sometimes it can be a whole day. And you need to think through what exactly are you applying and what is the purpose for it and what kind of audience is behind that. And so I listed here some funding schemes or purposes, for example, travel, fellowships, mobility, or personal grant with a team, networking, collaboration, infrastructure. So a lot of different types of funding. And all these type of fundings have different evaluation criteria and different objectives, but very frequently similar writing instructions when it comes to strong points and weak points. What are the arguments for funding it and what are the arguments not funding it, and knowing what the answer should be if it is a weak point. I don't know exactly where you are in your career, but in most cases you start up first with trying to get funding for your salary. And I put here the different main schemes when it comes to project funding with different purposes. And on the left side, PI salary. There you are going for your own salary and you are embedded in a host institute where it's also supervision. But if you get further into your career, then you might consider to apply for yourself and a team. And depending upon how you're paid by the host institute, it might be that they are charging partially the salary to the grant or not. And that gives you then the opportunity to start a team. But you're working very frequently in very large networks and collaborations. But anyhow, you would like to set up in such a way that you can have a local team where you are leading the team. When it comes to those grants, being in fellowship or something else, when it comes to PI salary or in PI and a team, which could be, for example, the funding of a national funding agency or the European Research Council, those are in very frequently bottom up. You decide what is the topic. So there it is important to tell why should the panel select your topic in view of all the other different topics that are there on the table of the reviewers. And then when it comes to the other form, top down, that can still also be from PI and a team, but that can also be for collaborations. And it can be collaborations on a national level, on European level, worldwide level, where you are with several researchers deciding in what direction to go depending upon the results and findings. And there it is very frequently top down. So there they have been listing what kind of topics they would like to fund because they have a purpose behind it. And that's important to realize. And when it comes to this kind of funding, nearly every country or large governmental organization has a Christmas tree. So this is the main structure of Horizon Europe with 3 pillars, and this funding for an individual team, this funding for a fellowship, this funding for research infrastructure, for collaboration, for networking, coming together. And every country has a Christmas tree if they are based in a developed country. And even if they are in a developing country, they are also having these kind of Christmas trees. And when it comes to Europe, it has his Christmas tree, Horizon Europe. And it's good to look at these Christmas trees and look at what kind of funding is there. And then you suddenly realize that they have their own variant of a Christmas tree. And that's why I put this slide in. There are variants of it, but you need to understand how the funding agencies are working. And what you need to realize is that there are review instructions for the reviewers, and there are writing instructions for the applicants. And a funding agency has clear evaluation procedure, how it is done step by step, but also having evaluation criteria that they use as a basis. And then they tell to the reviews how they should use it. Most of the funding agencies have similar goals of funding research, but they might have different topics when it comes to the top-down approach, but when it comes to bottom-up, it is the same. But still, there are different flavors there, and they're using words, and if you look at them, you think they are the same, but they might not be the same. And that's why I depicted here different Christmas tree, but also the size of the Christmas tree can be different from country to country, depending upon how much money a country is putting in research. So when it comes to selling a project proposal, where do you need to start? You need to think through what exactly is the purpose of a funding agency and look at it. Is this something interesting? Yes or no? And could you sell something to that audience that is behind that funding agency? And you need to think through who is exactly the audience. Is it composed of an audience of experts working in your field because it is a very dedicated panel, only funding projects in astronomy or something like that, or broader? And that's something you need to think through. When it comes to European Research Council, they have a panel called Universe Science, where everything goes in, but it can also go into another panel if it is more basic research. But there they have 27 panels, so they are quite dedicated. But if you're going for a national research council, they don't have so many panels. So then probably you have to think through, how broad is your audience? Are the people coming from your field, or might also be people sitting there from physics who don't know so much, or chemistry, or maybe engineering? And that's important. You need to think through who is your audience, because then you can also start to think through, in the combination with the purpose of the funding agency, what could be submitted there. And if you then have been thinking through, then you can start with project development, looking at the project idea that could be ideal for the funding agency, but could also be explained in a way to the audience that they understand it, so that they can write a report and have discussions on it. But besides the project development, you also need to start to think about the storyboard. What kind of information will go into the project proposal, and the why question. And we will also discuss the definitions of words, and you also need to develop your style. So what I will do in the next slides, I will go into some of them, of these topics, except for the audience, because we discussed it, and also the purpose we discussed. Oh no, I forgot that I still have a slide on the audience. What you need to do is you need to look at what exactly is the goals of the funding agency. And that's very frequently written in the first few pages. And you need to look at it. Is it about basic research, or is it about changing the knowledge? Is it about astronomy? What exactly is it about? And then you need to look at the evaluation criteria, and you need to print them. And you need to think through what could be the potential meaning of the evaluation criteria, and also for each criterion, and what kind of wording is being used there, and discuss that with your colleagues so that you get a little bit of feeling for it. You need to look at the writing instructions and the templates to see what kind of wording is being used there, because you would like to use some wording that is recognized by the audience, so that they can tick off, yes, I noticed it is novel. Oh, yes, indeed, I noticed it is really unconventional research. Ah, look at that. There is also risk built in, and I see a backup plan. And you would like to use wording that they easily recognize, so they can search through the text. Of course, these reviewers are not stupid, so they know similar words, but sometimes similar words might imply something different than you think. And you need to look at the evaluation procedures and also the review instructions, so you know exactly who is taking decision. Is it an external referee, or is there a panel taking decision? And that's very, very important. And then you need to think through, are you writing according to the evaluation criteria? And are the writing instructions in line with the evaluation criteria? And that is not happening frequently. In most cases, the writing instructions are not in line with the evaluation criteria. If that is the case, then it is indicating they give you some academic freedom. But if the writing instructions are very much in line with evaluation criteria, there's not so much academic freedom. And that's important to know, because you need to think through, how are you going to sell it? What kind of wording can you use? And where can you come up with something different? And where can you present it slightly different than what you normally do, or what is according to the writing instruction? And that's very, very important to realize. And then you need to think through what could be the competence of the panel making the selections, and are they also having people from the panel reviewing, or are they using external referees? So that's about, I would say, gathering intelligence and trying to figure out what is this all about. But when it comes to the project development, that's slightly something different. There you need to talk, listen, and talk. And I will tell you why. The reason here too is that if you are thinking, you are not thinking aloud. And even if you're thinking aloud, you're not phrasing the wording in such a way that the reader can understand. And to be able to do that, you need to talk. You need to hear yourself. You need to see somebody listening and then rephrasing it in other wording. And most applicants who were successful have been telling me, we spend time talking, listening, how others are phrasing the wording. And that's very, very important, because then you realize how you could tell it with different words. There's something else also. You need to visualize it. You need to make drawings for yourself so that you can visualize, what is this all about? What do we know? What is a project idea? And where will you make a difference? And that will help you also in conceptualizing what you're doing, because you need to note on the main lines. You should be able to tell in 3 up to 5 sentences, what is your project about? And all the words need to be correct. And all the messages need to be correct, giving full information based on 3 to 5 sentences. And that's not easy. But something else, you need to look at exactly what is the funding agency requiring, because you probably have to fine tune the project concept or the project idea so that it fits. And then you need to look at, can you do it? Because most funding agencies are not funding blue sky research. So you would like to tell why it's feasible when it comes to the strategy, approach, and the methodology used. Probably also need to provide some evidence to show that will change our knowledge. And then you need to assess what exactly is your scientific expertise and competence. And that's based on what has been published, what's in the public domain. It can also be in an open archive. And of course, how bold you can be is depending upon your career phase and what you've been doing in the past. And you need to think through, who can help you in developing that project idea. Do you need help in writing? Do you need to have help in discussing what you have been writing? And do you also need help when you're carrying out your research? All these things need to be thought through. And when you've been thinking through everything, then you have an idea. You know what are your chances. And you start to realize what you can do and what you might not be able to do. And then you need to put together a storyboard for the project proposal, because you need to sell something. And you need to go through the writing instruction and go through the evaluation criteria to think through what should be the subheadings. And it's very, very important. I give here an example of opening it up so that when they start to read it, they will enter on the same page as where you are at the moment. You need to explain the novel elements in the context of the state of the art. So you need to look at, what is the state of the knowledge? What do we know? You need to look at the state of the methodology. What kind of cutting edge methodologies are we using? And then you also need to look at, what is the dynamics in the research field? What are the different groups doing around the world on the same topic? And where can you make a difference? That's what you need to think through on the level of the project idea, the methodology, but also setting the research agenda and changing dynamics in the research field. And then I put in the regular things like project concept, methodological approach, objectives and research questions, hypothesis, project plan. When it comes to project plan, that is about the implementation. It's one thing to have ideas and coming up with proposing methodology, but then you're only describing what the proposed research is. And somehow you need to tell that you can carry out, and you know exactly what needs to be done in each phase of the research project. But you also know exactly when to deviate. And that's why you need a Gantt chart and PER chart, because then you can tell what are the intermediate goals and stages when it comes to Gantt chart, and PER chart tell where's the interdependencies, and also providing a risk analysis with backup plans. But what's important is you should tell what we will learn. If it doesn't have any scientific added value, why bother to fund it? When it comes to project plan, I put wording in here and I leave it up to you to think through how you put it, but you need to have a storyboard and it needs to be in line with what the reviewers are looking for and what the writing instructions are indicating. And you need to look at, is it matching, yes or no, or do you need to add new things there? So that's one thing. Then you piece together a storyboard, you start to fill in a little bit of information so you know what kind of content is going in, but that's not enough. The panel is wondering why. Why should they fund the proposed research? And that's about what? What is this all about? And so what? Who cares? There are other topics that needs to be funded. It's also about how we're going to do it. And that is about activities that you are going to carry out and the tasks, the methods or tools or models being used, the data that you need and what kind of data, do you have access and when are they available? And why? Why those activities? Why those methods? Why that data? And when? And that's about the Gantt chart. And does it fit into the roadmap that's there when you're doing research? Are those facilities there? Or do they need to be built? And when is the timing right? When will we get the first data in? And do you have access at that moment? So that's important. And who? You? Why you? And who's being involved? Why a team? Is it so complex? Is it so much work? Do you need a team? And do you need help from somebody else? And what kind of expertise are they bringing in? And is that different and will help you and also propose research? Why? And is it timely? If you look at the recent developments and the roadmap that we have. And all this is very important because a lot of people think it's all about what, how, when, who, and timely. But the why question is important because that gives the rationale of, are the strong points in your proposed research or are there many weak points? And you need to tell that explicit to the reviewer. And that is about selling it. And what most people are doing is they propose research. They're not telling explicitly how they're going to carry out, and they're not addressing the why question. Why bother? Why select your research project if you have all the proposals in the stack? But it's something else. You also need to look at the words that they are using. And it's interesting to look at what wording research councils are using. They use the term novel, and it's not, in most cases, not about incremental research or the next step in research when it comes to research councils, because research councils are focusing mainly on generating new knowledge. So they expect, and in most cases, that there's something unconventional or innovative in the project proposal. And you need to think through what is novel being a logical step forward and what is novel being a little bit surprising and unconventional in view of the ongoing research. There's also the word risk. And some funding agencies don't like risks at all. Everything needs to be mitigated, low risk or medium risk, because they think that if you know exactly what you have to do, you will succeed. But that probably will lead only to an incremental step in research. Other funding agencies say, well, we don't have a problem with risks, and explicitly ask, what are the challenging parts? And you need to look at what should be the level of risk and what kind of wording are they using for risk. Risk can be something that is difficult, but it can also be a challenge. And that's what you do in research. You address challenges. You want to have an answer to a research question or to solving a problem or understanding something better. And when it comes to mitigation, some funding agencies are asking for mitigation plans. They don't discuss alternative plans, and others are discussing alternative plans. A mitigation plan is lowering a risk that is there without changing how you're going to do the research. So that can be that you have some preliminary data to show it can be done, then you have been mitigating the risk. It can also be that you hire somebody who has the expertise, so that it's also mitigated, but you carry out the research according to the research plan. Alternative plan is that you propose something different as a backup plan. And you need to look at what are they doing. Are they asking for mitigation plan? Low risk projects. Are they asking alternative plans? Oh, they're interested in high risk challenging projects. And then the wording groundbreaking breakthrough. I don't like it, but that's because I'm coming from the life sciences. And in my field, you're not using terms groundbreaking breakthrough, because if it is leading to a breakthrough, you have the Nobel Prize. So, but it is important to realize, because funding agencies are using it. And groundbreaking is not an incremental advancement in the research field, but is significant. And people remember that contribution. That's groundbreaking. And the groundbreaking can open up the possibility to force a breakthrough. But a breakthrough, that's really, you found something that's giving an answer to a question that we are still waiting for to be answered, or you're coming up with knowledge that everybody's looking for, and really opening up then completely novel research avenues and horizons. But groundbreaking is telling you which direction to go. Then you come up with results and you show the way for the others to follow you. And when it comes to breakthrough, then you show different directions that can be walked by anybody who is interested to walk in that direction. When it comes to funding agencies, they're also using the terms concept and idea. And the funny part is that they're not taking it apart. And there is a different meaning in it, because when it comes to ideas, that's very frequently a project idea. But some funding agencies are saying project concept, and they are then referring to the idea, but the idea needs to be well developed. It needs to be thought through, and you need to explain why exactly that idea. You need to go back to what do we know and what's the argumentation for exactly that project idea. But there are also funding agencies where they use the concept for new knowledge emerging. And that's something you need to think through, because that is about changing the textbook and also changing the way we are thinking. And when it comes to feasibility, what reviews are very frequently using is to see what is based on assumptions and what's based on facts. And that's about the argumentation for what you're doing. And when everything is based on assumptions, you're out, because most likely you're failing, because you don't know which direction to go. You have no clue what will come out of it. So your project proposal needs to be to some extent based on facts. And that's different from field to field. How that is exactly perceived can also be partial fact, or working with a very well-developed research question or well-developed hypothesis, knowing what might be going on. You still are not sure, but yeah, you might know what's ongoing. And also you need to look at exactly what are they phrasing when it comes to words. Are they interested in deliverables, findings, or results? Deliverables are reports, and findings, it's not telling a lot. But the results, that is something that you can take and that you can conceptualize to new knowledge. So look at what wording they're using in the description and think through what might this be imply. And look also at how other funding agencies are phrasing it, because then you suddenly see that people are using the same words, but it might be in different context, or they are using the appropriate word to signal to you what should you go for when it comes to specific funding agency. I will give you an example of the European Research Council. The European Research Council is about empowering individual researchers. So it's really about a principal investigator and her or his team, not about collaboration, not about a network. It's empowering an individual researcher to enable her or him to make a difference. And excellence is the sole criterion. So it's a bottom-up nature. But look at the next bullet. There it says advancing science, scholarship, and engineering. And that's telling you, if it's about advancing what's ongoing in research, it is about cutting edge research, And that's the first requirement. And the second is also setting a clear and inspirational target. So that's about generating results that will change the research agenda by your project. So it is not bottom up. They're not funding everything. They are funding things that are having an impact on our knowledge. And when it comes to excellence, they phrase it as a definition of groundbreaking, ambition, and impact. And that's what you need to realize. They have a definition for excellence, but they're not using only the term excellence. They immediately indicate the wording groundbreaking, ambition, and impact. And what's also very funny is that if you look at the evaluation criteria, they indicate what impact they are expecting. And I'll read the sentence to you. To what extent? To what extent? This implies that you need to provide explicit information on to what extent. And then the proposed research, that's the promises you're making, is high risk / high gain. So what you're dealing with is a balance between high risk with high gain. And the balance should tip to high gain. But it is not necessary because they give an explanation for the high risk, high gain balance between brackets. For example, if successful, the payoffs will be very significant. That is the breakthrough. So there is a chance that your project will lead to breakthrough, but there's a high risk that the research project does not entirely fulfill its aims. And that's telling you you don't have to succeed fully, but there must be in part, entirely fulfill its aims, there must be in part that is a safe bet, that will be doable, and that will advance the research field. And that's bullet number 3. So when it comes to advancing, that's a minimum requirement within ERC, and they hope that what you are proposing might lead to a breakthrough. And this is what you need to do with the evaluation criteria and the writing instructions, and also with the information they're providing you to look at the wording and analyze what kind of research are they looking for. And besides that, you need to develop your own style. And that's something that is taking time. That's not happening overnight. And what you need to do is to look at what are the customs in your research field. Look at how people are applying and being successful. How do they structure it? Look at how much do you have an academic freedom to deviate from it? What is the minimum of customs that need to be there? And when it comes to quality of science, you need to think through what is quality of science according to you. Is it mainly based on knowledge? Is it based on modeling? Is the combination of knowledge and modeling? Is it mainly on the data and the modeling? You need to think through, because that's important, because you need to tell to the reader why they should go for your project. And then when it comes to telling, you need to develop a way of telling everything in a logical way, but also explicit. So if you are saying words, it must be clear for everybody what you are referring to, even if they're not working on your topic. And when it comes to logical, it really should be that the reader can follow you. They follow you and they forget to think because they understand everything. And every time when they're thinking, hold on, the answer is there. It must be logical. And you need to think through what are the main elements that need to be explained, and where do you say, well, that is the wrap up to put everything in a larger context, but it needs to be logical. And how you do it, that's different from project to project, because it depends upon how you need to explain it to the reader in a way that they understand it, and that they're not thinking, oh my goodness, this is too complex. We're not going to fund that because the proposed research is so complex in itself. The knowledge is also complex. So this applicant will never be able to deliver what the promise is made. But you also need to think through the rhetorical style and look at how people are using it. It's about arguing, but also telling why should the panel or the review say this is great. And then the storyline, that's about really telling the bits and the pieces that they need to know to understand what this is all about. But also the implementation plan is important, because that tells how you're going to do it. How will you monitor the progress? And the writing style, it's up to you. You can come up with a writing style that you think that is nice, that goes with me, and what jargon you're using. And a lot of reviewers are saying they can recognize project proposals coming from a specific hand. It has a signature of the applicant. And you need to visualize, you need to make sure they understand it. What is this all about? So that they are not only looking at the words, but they can think 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional by looking at your images. And also, what is this all about when it comes to the proposed research? So a graph or a visualization of the proposed research. And you need to be bold and innovative when it comes to doing research, but modest about what you would like to achieve. Because reviewers like modest people who are bold when it comes to proposed research. And what you also need to do is you need to learn from the feedback, analyze the feedback, and also the procedure that they have for assessing it. You can see it when you get the feedback, how they've been doing it. And also ask feedback from researchers and support staff. So you get feedback when you're writing, but also when you got the results from a funding agency. And think through how that will enable you to develop your own style of presenting things. And what I see very frequently is that the first draft that people are drafting is for themselves. And then if they have sufficient time, they are able to rewrite it in such a way that is nice to read. That's not it. But to make it really brilliant, they probably have to redraft it with the help of others. And if you are doing that and you take the time to draft and redraft, then you start to realize that it might be a good proposal and you can apply again, because you should apply again. But it's something else. You need to train yourself on talking to people, and you need to train yourself on putting things on paper. It's very, very important, because it will enable you to move faster through the rewriting. And I can tell you that even brilliant researchers, they might come up with 23 versions of proposals before it is perfect and they get funding as outstanding. And with that, I wish you all good luck.
Thank you so much, Mette. That was very insightful. I think we can see you have many years of experience in really dissecting all of these different instructions. I think you need a special eye for this.
Yeah, but so there I disagree, because it is something that you should be learning already when you're a PhD student. So I will be honest, I had to write my own postdoc project for myself and my technician. And that was the only way of staying at my host institute when I was still waiting for my PhD degree. I looked at what was this all about. And then I knew how to draft it. It was absolutely no problem. But I analyzed what they were looking for and how to draft it. And my PhD supervisor had only one comment: you need to spell that word differently. That was the only thing. He was just like, wow. Yeah. But that is because I analyzed it. And I think that's important, that you start to realize you need to analyze exactly what are they looking for and how are they doing it and who is sitting there. What kind of jargon can you present to them in such a way that they understand it?
So I think the key point here is that you also really need to set aside the time to do this then.
Yes, indeed. It's very, very important. But I can tell you something else. It's the thinking and the talking. So I just gave a reference now to a long time ago, but I can tell you that when it comes to drafting proposals for the FP7 and the EU program for collaboration, I was the one supposed to draft 2 parts, and one was very, very difficult. That was about the impact. I'm not a researcher, and I had to draft about the impact. So then you need to go into the research field and you need to start to understand it and figure out how should I be doing it. And because I started to think very early, I knew I would get into the phase that when I saw something, I knew it was something that was for me to give me a message. And then I could see how I was going to do it. And then the only thing I need to do was to take one day, and then I wrote everything on paper and get 5 points of the 5 points. And that's about thinking so much that you can flip it around in your brain. And that's what you need to do. Most people can only tell them one way, but you should be able to get it into your head in such a way that you can flip it around and they give a completely different introduction in telling it in one go, in a way that the reader can follow it. And what is very important is that you explain and you then give a definition. And then you continue with explaining and a definition. And that the definition is building up in such a way that the reader is just like, I don't have to read this twice. I read it once and I know it. But this is thinking and it's not writing. And what most people are doing is writing. They sit down and start to write immediately. The writing in the beginning is just a sentence, a word, some figures, etc. But the thinking, you need to get in a situation that you are in the project. And then you can flip it around and tell it in a different way.
You have to
because
think a
it needs
bit.
To be logical. Yes.
Yeah, you need to think a bit like the reviewer and thinking also about making the task a bit, I would say, easier for the reviewer, so that they can really follow the whole reasoning. But that wouldn't that requires also probably a good knowledge also of the a good knowledge of the whole literature, so you can grasp also the important concepts and everything, and so that someone, you will usually you will have the panelists that will not be in the field, but then sometimes you have external reviewers that are in the field and then need to be spoon-fed also the information that they want to see. So
Yeah.
there is a bit of a trade-off also.
Yeah, so that's why I was referring in my talk, I did not put it in the slide, state of the science. What do we know when it comes to what's published and in the open archives? And you have a problem because that's developing. State of the methodology, state of the art of methodology. What exactly is everybody using and why? And what are the current developments and what is being planned as a development? Certainly when you're in your field, where you have roadmaps for everything. And then the third one is the dynamics. You need to know exactly what people are doing. And the last thing is done by conferences, but also asking colleagues, do you know what's ongoing? In most cases, when you talk to colleagues, it's not about telling what you're going to do, so that suddenly the project idea is gone and somebody else is picking it up. No, it's about, really collecting intelligence, knowing exactly what's ongoing. So you're right when it comes to that, Gael. It's not only about the project, but you need to know exactly where you are in the research field dimension. And that is what is the opening and the context. You need to provide a context and tell why exactly the proposed research. And there I see that a lot of people are forgetting it because they think it's about proposing. I need to propose something novel, but they need to propose something that is novel, that's different than what others are doing at the moment, and also what others have published.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And that's why the talking is so important. Talking, listening, and talking. And the writing, it comes in a later phase, and that's very, very important. I realize if you write for the first time, it's not easy, but but the thinking and the talking, and mainly the talking, is very, very important.
But having then a good circle of colleagues and also people that you can ask questions to, and that will give you also different vision, is also extremely important. So for that, networking is also key, I would guess, to get all that vision of the field. Yeah. It requires a lot of investment.
Yes, it is an investment, but that's what goes with a job if you stay within research. And the pity is that most of the funding is provided by project funding. And this is the whole problem. And in the past, they were also providing more money via governmental funding. So then you had lump sum funding and you could decide what you were going to do with the money. but currently everything is project funding, and that is creating a problem everywhere.
Mette, I think we'd like to jump into one of the live questions that came in. And so this question refers to more the whole package of your application. So of course, there's the proposal and your project description, but then there's also, of course, the CV. And so the question is, what is most important thing of a grant application? The CV of the person applying or the idea of the research project?
The idea of the research project is more important, and then whether you have the expertise and capacity to execute the proposed research successfully. So when it comes to the CV, there are different forms of CVs. You have a job application CV, you can have a historical reflection, and what they're looking for is not only the history of what is your education, where have you been working, and with whom, etc., but they also would like to know what were your contributions. And what most people are doing, they're listing the articles. And if you look at the titles of the articles, you still don't know anything. So you need to tell what's in the articles. So you need to provide narratives telling what have you been doing in the past, where have you been contributing, and what is your scientific expertise and capacity. And that needs to match what you're proposing. And certainly if you're a young researcher.
So one thing you also mentioned that I thought was very interesting is that you mentioned as a risk mitigation that you could actually hire somebody with missing expertise. I don't think this is something I had realized before, in fact.
Then I would say that when it comes to PhD students, they will become copies of you because you're the PhD supervisor. And it might be that there are slightly different flavors, but in principle, they're copies of you. And that's also why you need to train PhD students, because you need to multiply yourself, because you are brilliant, so you would like to multiply yourself. But postdocs, they come in and they bring in expertise. So they have been trained by somebody else and they bring in an expertise that might not be in your team. And because they bring it in, it suddenly becomes part of your team. You are embedding something that you don't have in your team. And when this person leaves, it's still there. And that's the brilliance. And then if you think, well, postdoc is not good enough, then you need to have a more senior researcher. But when it comes to senior research, you don't want to have this person full time. You just want to have this person for 10% of the time, or helping you out for several months and then leave. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to talk, but not having the person on the project, because you don't want to be in a situation that everybody says, but is this your project?
Yeah, that's the dangerous part. I have another live question about the role of interviews. What's the role of interviews in pitching for research funding?
It is very, very important, because when it comes to these kind of pitching and interview sessions, you can make or break it. So you can go from number one to the bottom, and you can go from the bottom quite high up and maybe end up with funding. So it's very important. But I can tell you something else. What is a problem is that when you're going in for an interview session, is that the reports of the external referees are there. Mm-hmm. And there might be somebody who's really the expert in the field coming up with very good arguments of telling why this should not be funded, and you did not address it. And this is something you need to think through. What is the ongoing dynamics, and how can I explain why they should go for your project proposal? So if you then don't have the right answers, then it is not going to help you at that moment. So you need to prepare it. If you're going in for an interview session, you need to see it as whether you have been applying a project proposal. You need to go through the phase of preparing yourself, not only when it comes to the knowledge, what's out there and what's everybody doing, but also your brain needs to be prepared for it, because you need to know the answers. So you need to train yourself on answering questions. Ask people in the corridor, can you ask me one or two questions, and then immediately give an answer. It needs to be trained so it becomes fluent, so that when you are in the interview session and you hear a question, you realize, hey, hold on, they're not asking for A, they are asking for alpha. I need to give another answer, slightly different, so that they understand it. And also that you hear what they're asking and then thinking, hey, hold on, you're forgetting the most important part, and volunteer information that they are not asking for. so that the whole panel understands you know all the ins and the outs and they can trust you. It's about trust. And this has also something to do with preparing in also, how are you standing, how are you answering, and also, well, if it's Zoom, how are you seated, but it's very, very important because you need to build up the trust in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And when you leave the room, they should just like be, wow, that was great. We learned something as a panel.
Yeah. You need to be quick in thinking, and you need to be trained to formulate your answers correctly also.
And
all
that
the
should
phrasing.
that should be doable because there's only one expert in the room, and that's you at that moment. And the panel knows you are the expert in the room.
Yeah. In that respect, for some funding agencies and you get the names of the panelists and you get their field of expertise. Do you consider that to be useful information in preparing, for example, so that you know how you can orient, for example, the presentation of the project when you know who will read it in the panel, for example?
Yes, that is certainly very useful, and certainly when you know that even although the panel members might be an expert on your topic, they have to act as generalists. So then you start to realize that even although they might know all the ins and the outs, when it comes to selecting, they are not allowed to say, well, let's go for this project because I understand it better. So they need to come up with arguments. And that's also why you need to look at the procedure. You need to know what's the role of the panel when you have an interview session. Are they acting as journalists and seeing what's the quality of what they're going to fund and what's below the quality threshold? And you also need to think through how you answer. Can they understand it? And then it's easy if there is indeed an expert, but still you have to answer such a way that the whole panel understands, because then the whole panel decides.
Mette, so we have a long question that came in on the Q&A, which is going a bit into criticizing the way that things are set up, which is something that you touched upon very briefly just shortly before. So I will read it out. So our attendee is writing, I am very much against the corporate culture pervading academia today, and especially the project funding part. Should we think about retaliating in similar vein? For example, biotech research companies hire contractors to write their projects in consultation with the researchers who will execute the project. Does it make sense to implement a model in which departments fund the consultant project writing while the person then can go on with what they really like to do, which is research?
Yeah. So you're talking to the wrong person. I'm a scientist, so I would say consultants. But now you have me online. So that's a contradiction in terminal. But what I can say is that I recognize immediately when somebody has been writing proposal for somebody else, immediately. And even if I'm not an expert on the topic. So I have been in situations that somebody else was writing and not the applicant. And this is not good. And there's something else. You know all the ins and the outs. But what you can do is ask this person to tweak it and go through it and provide feedback and comments and tell something about it. But letting the person draft is not going to work. And I can tell you that we had big fun as a panel member when we were reviewing project proposals in Brussels for the European Commission, the European Union. I was in a panel of health, and we recognized those projects. They have the same layout, the same colors, the same way of telling things, using the same words. And I saw it on the screen next to me, and I said, that's. And then the person next to me started to laugh and said, yes, she said, it's correct. And this is a problem. And we have been drafting, as you understood, proposals for collaborative research, but there it is. There are parts where that's not about science. So those are then drafted by the experts who know how to draft those paths. But when it comes to science, yeah, you're the only expert. And you have a problem. You're competing and you have no clue what's on the table. And most likely there are similar projects going in on the same topic. And they took the time to draft it properly, coming up with the right wording, with the right arguments, and they get the funding. You can recognize it immediately. So if you're going for collaborative research when it comes to European Union, yeah, then ask people to draft specific parts for you where you're not an expert, like management, how do you do it? Outreach, how do you do it? But science, you're the only one that's an expert.
So I guess that is a very clear no.
Yeah, and I understand the problem of project funding. It's really a problem, but for that you really need to go back to the universities and say to the universities, you need to start a lobby because it's going in the wrong direction. Everything is bound up in project funding, and that's not the way it should be. But it's also depending upon the philosophy of governments. So when you're looking at Europe, there's not so much money going to research. They have a 3% threshold that they need to reach, and most countries are not at the 3%. I think the Netherlands is at 1.7. Norway is a little bit above 2%, and well, yeah, Germany is above 3%. Finland just dropped a little bit under 3%. Sweden is quite high. I'm not sure where they are at the moment, but it is not good. And this has everything to do with how do you spend money? Do you spend them on taking care of people and of illness and the ones who don't have a job? Or do you say, well, research is more important than education of children? I don't know. You have to make a choice. You can't pay for everything, because if you have to pay for everything, the taxes will be so high that everybody's complaining. So they're making choices. And they have cut a lot of the money when it comes to defense in Europe, for example. But look at the United States. They pay a lot on defense. It's choices made. It's all about political programming and the history of a country. And also, of course, the type of parties that are in the government, whether you're, yeah, that's also, of course, of relevance. But they listen to the population, and that's what kind of policy they have. And research, yeah, it's booming business. When I was going for my own doctor's degree, there were not so many people. Well, we're all small universities, and now they are huge, big.
Yeah, I mean, even astronomers alone, I think even over our shorter careers as early career researchers, we've seen the numbers go up. It's impressive.
Yeah, this has everything to do with the business model. So now we come into the business model. So when it comes to the business model, if you're not getting lump sum funding, you can't have permanent staff. So what's ongoing is that in the past, the permanent staff was going for the doctor's degree. And now they have temporary staff going for PhD degrees, and also they have young researchers that are on temporary positions. But in the past, when I was going for my degree, I was sitting in a room where there were 5 people, permanent job, who were going for a doctor's degree, and only one got the doctor's degree, and all the other ones, they were gone after several years. They had to go. And this is a business model that they have come up with because the government need to cut the budget. And if the government is cutting the budget, you need to come up with other solutions, and that's project funding.
Yeah. So I have another question on a, I would say, more specific question. For example, let's say you're trying to build a team, and you have to provide, for example, the profiles of the people that you would like to have in your team. Do you have to be extremely specific? For example, I mean, would you recommend being, for example, very specific? I've heard the story of up to a point of someone knowing already who he wanted to hire because the community was relatively small. And that person had already put the names of the people. Would you see that as bad practice, and would you recommend it or not when you're working in very specific areas where you'll have maybe 3 or 4 people who will, in any case, if you have an external reviewers who will know that you have only a very select number of people who will do the job?
Yeah, so if this person is named, then this person has given a written consent that if the grant is awarded, this person will work on the project. And otherwise, the project is terminated. So that's up to you. If you name people and you need to be sure, and if they can't be replaced, that might jeopardize keeping the grant.
Yeah.
So I would say it's not so smart. I would do it with permanent staff, but not with temporary staff, because temporary staff need to go for a career. So if they get a better offer, then they might be gone. But what you can do is say that you know people who could be lined up for the position, and also tell not only that you know them, but that you know also where good master students are being educated that could become PhD students, or PhD students who could become postdocs. So then you also tell that you have a network where you can go for it. But if there's only one person in the whole world who can do it, yeah, the question is, should that person not be the principal investigator and the applicant, and why you?
Yeah.
So you really have a problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what goes on then is that most people are saying there are two going in, so they share the grant.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So and that's why it's so important to look at what is it exactly. Is it about a fellowship, an individual salary, or is it an individual team? And when it comes to individual team, you would like to tell that whatever happens, I will be fine. And when it comes to collaboration, then you have a shared responsibility. So if then one partner leaves, then the rest has to take up those tasks and carry them out. And if not, they need to find somebody else who can replace the person. And if that's not happening, then they can terminate the grant.
So, Mette, perhaps I have one more question for you as well. In the meanwhile, I'd like to urge our audience to ask their final questions, if we have any, before we wrap it up. So my question to you is, to what extent is it our duty as researchers to also educate ourselves about management, team management? So, for example, proposals, we have to put in things like a Gantt chart. So you can make a very simple Gantt chart, or you can download very fancy software and make a very sophisticated Gantt chart. And I mean, okay, Gantt chart is just a chart, but besides that, there's so much more to management, which we don't normally execute as researchers, but yet to some degree is now also expected from us, especially the larger of a project proposal that you're writing.
Yeah, so then
How
I
do you
have
do this?
then I have a question for you all, and that is, what is required to obtain a permanent position as senior researcher, and have you been looking at it? So now it depends upon where are you working, and what I'm going to tell you now is general, independent on whether you are working for university, research institute, or a company. You need to have some skills when you're going for a senior position. And you need to analyze exactly what are those skills. When it comes to universities, they are providing these skills internal. They have internal training for these skills, like management, etc. And also administration, giving presentations, how to write proposals, where to find the funding, and all these things. And when it comes to research institutes and companies, you can go then to courses to follow it. But you need them, because if you would like to become a senior researcher, you need to know how to manage everything. Because you're a senior, you have responsibilities. But the big question is, if you're working within the university, have you ever looked at the requirements for becoming a full professor? Because if you then are looking at that, then you start to realize what competences you all need to have. And now you have a problem. You are PhD students. And when it comes to PhD students, in most countries, they have several PhD students, up to 20 or 30 PhD students per professor. So then you are not being educated on the floor. If you are one or two PhD students per professor, you're educated on the work floor. You get all the training. You get the training of reviewing articles, writing proposals, organizing events, managing, organizing a workshop, making sure that everything is done, and also doing teaching, education, etc. And that's all relevant to become full professor. But you don't have it. So what you need to do then is, if you did not get that opportunity during your PhD period, is that you need to do it during your postdoc period. And if you focus only on research and you forget that other part, you have to leave the field after a while because you become too old and you don't have the skills for becoming a permanent staff member. So you need to work on it. So there are tasks there, and now I need to remember them correctly in my head. So what you need to be able to show is that when it comes to research, that you're able to attract funding and set up new research lines if you would like to become full professor or associate professor or assistant professor. So applying for funding and setting up new research lines. Second one, you need to show that you have experience in PhD supervision. And in most cases, you need to show that the PhD student got also the degree. That is indicating research and supervision of team. Next one, education. If you would like to become associate assistant professor, full professor, you need to show that you have experience in education and teaching on different levels. And if you're going up more senior, not only in helping doing it, but also developing new curriculum. That's very, very important. And then when it comes to the part of the management, it's important that you can show that you are able to manage, but also to collaborate with people and also initiate new collaborations, etc. But please look at the requirements, and then you see that all these things are counting. And if you're not able to organize a conference or a workshop, or not able to set up collaboration, or not able to set up new research lines or supervise people, and there's no evidence there, then you will never get a permanent position within a university that will line you up for becoming full professor. But if you're in a research institute, then it is different, because there you don't have the teaching and education, but you still need to show that you can lead a team and set up new research lines and also connect. So what I advise you is to really look at the website of your institution to see what are the requirements for becoming full professor.
I think the difficulty is that most of the time this is not really written out in such plain language as you have just phrased it.
Oh, yeah. That's I'm a specialist on this. So I realized afterwards that I was lined up for professorship, but I left research. So I understand the disappointment of my former PhD supervisor. But I'm giving trainings on career perspectives and development, and then I tell them what's the business model of universities, and also I'm telling them what they need to be aware of if they would like to have a career. And most people think it's all about research, and they do it on purpose, because if you have people focusing on research, they will never get a permanent position as professor, so they will be out. And the problem with the business model is that most of the people need to leave. And when it comes to leaving, I'm just going to look at the slide that I have here. But when it comes to the professorships, you need to look at how many professors are there within your department of faculty. And then you start to realize the problem. And then you need to look at what's the turnover of these professors, probably decades. And you need to look at the associate and the assistant professor who would line them up for professorship. So they are in the way, they're blocking you. And you probably have some permanent researchers also there who are hoping to get an assistant or associate professorship. And then you have, I don't know how many postdocs. And I don't know how many PhD students, because it's multiplying. And there are more, in some cases, more PhD students than postdocs, but can also be the other way around. And there are, I don't know how many students with a turnover that's fast, same as the PhD students who are waiting for taking your position. And then you get a pyramid. And then you have all the students at the bottom, and then a little bit smaller, the PhD students, the postdocs, the permanent staff, with the ones who have a position without going for a professorship because they're or hoping, and then the assistant professors, associate professors, and professors. And then you realize this is not going to work because the people up there, they stay. They stay for decades. You get professorship at what age? 45, 50? And you're not retiring before the retiring age is there. And they are blocking your career. And that's the business model of universities. You're not supposed to stay. So why bother to inform you, except if you're a promising researcher? But there's something else. What they probably also notice is that you're not asking for things. You should go and ask. Please, can I review some articles? Yeah, I hear that you are reviewing a project proposal. Might I do first a review for the project proposal, and then you can tell me, hey, you're organizing an event. I would like to organize an event. I know that in most cases you have a spokesperson or kind of spokesperson to help to monitor everything, but you need to show that you are willing to take that step outside research and also carrying on the shoulders the management tasks and responsibilities, the academic duties, but also responsibilities within your institute. And most people are not willing to do it because they say it's so much work and boring.
Well,
yeah. So now you got my explanation why I am not a professor. I thought I'm not going to do that. I'm crazy. I'm not going to sit at home till 12 o'clock and then doing all the work. No.
Yeah.
Okay, Mette, thank you so much for this wake-up call for all of us.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wish you good luck.
You were full of tips. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
then this is all on the internet, I understand, so everybody can listen to this talk. But I hope you. I wish you all good luck. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Mette, thank you again so much. Thank you everybody else for tuning in. I think we'd like to advertise a few things before people disappear. I think first things first is the election. So we are running an election for the next set of organizing committee members of our working group of junior members. So please consider applying. The call is open and the deadline is June 25th.
Yeah. So for these, we will organize also coffee breaks with Q&As that you can tune in for. The next one is on the 15th and on the 21st of June. So if you have any questions regarding the duties, responsibilities, etc. of the organizing committee, do not hesitate to tune in to ask these questions. Also, if you have questions about the application procedure, or contact us on Slack if you want to talk about this. The other thing we would like to advertise also is, as you might have noticed, is that we published recent logo travels on our social media account. So don't hesitate to take pictures in places around where you are with the logo, and send us the pictures you're taking. So we will advertise them on the social media. I think that's on my side. I think that's it. And the next, so also tune in for the next talk that will be Tuesday. So mark the date, Tuesday, the 22nd of June, which will be by Dr. Stefania Giordini of the Red Cross, who will talk to us about how to be an astrophysicist with impact outside of the university. So mark the date, Tuesday, the 22nd of June, from 8 to 9 UTC. So that's it. Thank you again for attending this session.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.